Good evening, and welcome to those joining us on the live stream to an evening with Mr. Robert Woodson, Sr. My name is Janaea Bennett. I'm the Executive Director of the Youth Leadership Foundation. And for those of you on the live stream who've been invited by friends or colleagues, the Youth Leadership Foundation is a program that supports youth with mentorship and character formation in our nation's capital, the goal of which is to provide young people with a moral compass and the personal wherewithal to be able to achieve greatness in service of their families, in service of their communities, and in service of their country. And so this is why we're especially thankful to have Mr. Woodson with us this evening. Every year we bring a figure who's prominent in the space of character education and mentorship to share with us, to encourage us in our work and inspire us with their own. And Mr. Woodson has had quite an inspiring career. So you grew up in Philadelphia?
Philadelphia. I was born during the Depression in a low-income black neighborhood. Contrary to what you read about, black Americans were not economically integrated. Doctors and lawyers did not live with people who drove trash trucks and worked in factories. That there was an income separation. So we lived in a low-income black neighborhood. My mother had 5 children. She had a 5th grade education. But every household, 98% of the households had a man and a woman raising children. Every corner had a black-owned store. Elderly people could walk safely without fear of being assaulted by their grandchildren. Never heard of a gunfire. Never heard of a child shot in their crib. And so when I was 9, my father died of war-related wounds. And so it meant that I had to rely on my peers as a support group or as a substitute family. That's why I guess I understand gangs. What's troubling about gangs is not the organization, it's its criminal behavior. And so my mother equipped me with the kind of values that I chose good friends. And so there were 6 of us who grew up together. Since that time, there are 3 of us left. One of them you would probably, those of you who are near my age or a little younger will know, he was Gordon on Sesame Street.
Oh.
Remember the guy with the fro?
Uh-huh.
Huh? Matt Robinson. That's Holly Robinson, the actor's father. He was married to Rodney Peake. About 12 years ago he died, and first time I ever been to Hollywood, I was invited to eulogize him. So I just said funny things about it, you know. He had a lot of money, but he didn't spend it on clothes.
It's probably a good perspective philosophy to have.
And everybody knew what I was talking about who knew him. So I just made sure people left there feeling joyous, you know, not sad. You know.
And so that community piece. And so most of your friends graduated a year before you. And you went into the Air Force.
Yeah, I did because, first of all, I didn't take school that seriously. I took courses based upon where my friends were. I was an A student in math because I didn't have to study. So that kind of carried me. But I didn't realize that after they graduated and went on to college, and I found myself unaffiliated, and everybody growing up in urban America knows you do not grow up unaffiliated, which meant I couldn't go to parties, had to walk to school. I had all of the protections and the family that I had disappeared. Yeah. And so I quit when I turned 17 and went into the military. At 17, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. They toured. I thought blacks were a majority in America until I got to basic training.
A world of difference.
I saw my squadron. There are 400 GIs being processed in a week, and that's only 8 to 10% were black. I said, there's something wrong with this picture here. So, but it really put you into a situation. Fortunately, I was blessed to go into training to enter the space program as airborne electronics. And, but I also was trained in Mississippi, so I had a chance to see racism in the raw in the 50s. So I knew firsthand. In fact, there was a young white guy, John Hornack, who we were buddies in basic training. And when we got to Mississippi, I said, let's go in town for a beer. So we got on the cab, and the cab driver, as soon as we got outside the gate, he said, I can take you or you, but not both of you.
Yeah.
So neither one of us went, but we couldn't socialize anymore.
Right.
So I realized that what the reality with segregation was. And then I was in Florida in the space program at Cocoa, Florida. Again, it was segregated. But I got my GED. I woke up one day and said, if I want respect, I have to become educated. So I got my GED, and I took courses at the University of Miami. I have 12 credits when I couldn't walk on the campus because of segregation. But the Air Force provided first class, all of the classes certified on the base to accommodate black airmen who could not. So that's the kind of adjustments that the military made. And so when I got out, I went to undergraduate school.
Right. Where you studied mathematics in undergrad and then social work in grad school.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, you joined the civil rights movement. Who was the person that pulled you in, or what was the set of circumstances that drew you into the movement?
Well, first of all, I was on my way to getting a degree in mathematics and joined the space program. I was offered a job, a GE, but like the 12 other GIs, we had to work full time. Affirmative action for us was working full time and going to school full time. And you took 12 hours, and then you went all year so you could graduate on time. And you had to qualify to get your GI Bill of Rights. You had to have minimum 12 hours. So all of us worked hard, full time. And I ended up working at a juvenile jail as a youth correction officer, locked behind 3 doors with 65 juveniles with no program or anything. Mm-hmm. Working from 4 to 12, and I went to school from 8 to 3.
Right.
So that's
and
my
then
schedule.
Just turned it on around, and did it right on around again.
But the only way you can make it in that environment is to earn their respect, not fear them, but earn their respect. And I kind of had a burning bush experience in the prison before I knew what a burning bush was. And that when administration went home, I would take the kids in an unsupervised area of the prison because the facilities were nicer, and I'd collect money from the guards and buy apples and stuff for them and play games with them. And I knew that if any incident occurred, I could have lost my job by taking them in. But they knew it.
Yeah.
I trusted them, and they trusted me, and we expect that. And one day, I was taking 2 of the kids to get the trash can to clean up, and all 60 of them stood up and applauded spontaneously, and it just messed me up, man. I turned on my heels, and stuff was flying, I'm crying, and I had to walk on the grounds. Again, I could have been fired because my partner had to take all 65 kids through the prison by himself, because I was just too messed up. The kids couldn't see me crying. I tell you, I'm sure about that. But I didn't know what was happening. I thought I was going crazy, to be honest with you. But I realized that I have to change the course of my life. But I also knew that it's not enough to love kids to change them, because there were 5 of them. If I had the money, I would have adopted them. They were there because of their circumstance. Their character was good. They were good kids. But they were there because of their circumstances. I'm glad my friends are coming. And so when I was in the juvenile jail, and the kids were very responsive to me, And so I said that loving kids is not enough. Love has to be accompanied by discipline. And so I said, maybe I need some professional training. So I went and got my degree at University of Penn School of Social Work, so I could use some professional skills to temper my love and passion for the kids. And then I got involved in the civil rights movement and then got into trouble there too.
Good trouble.
Good trouble, yeah.
Okay. And so please, I mean, if you'd share just a little bit, I know that at some point you were a little disenfranchised with some of the work you were doing. I guess before we get there, what were the goals then? What were the things that energized you? What were the projects that you were working on?
What energized me has always been the attitude of low-income people in these communities to have overcome trauma that they've suffered. I've always felt that my passion was serving the least of God's children, and that I ran to people that other people ran from. And so that's what it, and so then the civil rights movement, I parted company because I was opposed to forced busing for integration. And so they said, because I said that the opposite of segregation is desegregation. It is not integration. And I think the civil rights movement wrongly argued that separate is inherently unequal. When you say something is inherently unequal, you say anything is all black is all bad. And I don't believe that. So I got into a debate with Julius Chambers. He was a black Harvard lawyer who headed the NAACP Legal Defense Fund.
Okay.
And I debated him at the New York Bar Association conference. And midway through the debate, I said, Julius, we have two circumstances. Circumstance A, that is all black, and there's the presence of educational excellence. School B is integrated where there's diminished excellence. Where should we send our children? He said to school B. I said, then you and I, there's nothing to debate, because I think if you pursue excellence, people will come to you, and the byproduct of pursuing excellence will be integration. Because people are drawn to excellence. Marva Collins in Chicago, who started the Eastside Academy, demonstrated that. She taught black kids that the school system gave up on, and she was successful. White parents from the suburb were bringing their children in limousines to attend her school because there was the presence of excellence. And so the civil rights movement's leaders said, well, Bob, your position is compatible with that of the Klan and the John Birch Society. I said, well, Hitler loved classical music. Shall I stop liking it?
To which they replied,
you should not take your position based upon who agrees or disagrees. You either stand for the truth or you don't. And so I stood my ground, and so that I parted company. The second thing that was the final blow was I led a demonstration outside of Wyatt Laboratory. They were a local pharmaceutical company, and on the line were barbers, hairdressers, factory workers, just ordinary folks, blue-collar people. And when they desegregated, they hired 9 black PhD chemists. So we approached these brothers and sisters to join the movement. They said, we got these jobs because we were qualified, not because of the sacrifice you all made. This happened to me twice, and I said, I'm in the wrong struggle. That many of the people who are sacrificing and suffering for change are not benefiting. They're guilty of a bait and switch game where we use the demographics of those at the bottom, and then when resources come, it goes to those at the top.
Yeah. You've mentioned this before. There's the problem of making...
Still going on today.
Right. Making the poor a commodity, So can you talk a little bit about that? What does that mean to make,
Well, people say, well, the problems facing low-income black communities today with the crime and out-of-wedlock births is a legacy of slavery and Jim Crow. That's just not true. My life is a testament to that. When I grew up, when white folks were at their worst, we were at our best. All of this disintegration of the family did not occur until the 60s. And that's when the poverty programs came on, where we changed dollars for dads. That's when the incarceration rates, and people need to know, incarceration rates of black from the turn of the century up to 60 was under 25%. Are you going to tell me that racism was worse today than it is then? But what happened with the poverty program, all of the institutions that were informal in the black community that accounted for us closing the education gap in the South, when we were denied access to hotels, we built our own. I can name 10 of them right now that you don't see hotels today. We had our own banks. We had 20 blacks who were born slaves who died millionaires. 2 of them purchased a plantation on which they were slaves. But all of this history was just gone in the 60s when we just became wards of the government, and the government spent $22 trillion on programs to aid the poor. 70 cents of every those dollars did not go to the poor. It went to professionals who served the poor. They asked which problems are fundable, not which ones are solvable. So we have created a commodity out of poor people. If my well-being, reputation, and income depends upon you being poor, what incentive do I have for you being independent?
Right. Yeah.
A friend of mine, John McKnight, said he's building a cabin up in Wisconsin. His electrician has one leg, and the plumber is a drunk. But their value to him is their skill. But if you were a disabilities director, you don't care about their skills. You want to make sure that they keep that one leg and he stays drunk. And so that's called a perverse incentives. In other words, I've been saying that we should look at the strategic interest, not an emotional or racial. What is the strategic relationship that you have with someone else?
Yeah.
Is my well-being at the expense of you, or your well-being or position comes at the price of my independence? So we need to look objectively about strategic interest.
Yeah. And I think one of these strategic interests is, you mentioned, the decline of family life, the decline of, the lack of fatherless homes. Right. These trends, what we're seeing now is that this doesn't exist in the black community. This is kind of like a pervasive American problem, a growing American problem. There's a book called Coming Apart, The State of White America, that talks about, the decline of family, generally speaking. And I'm just sort of curious, like, what is sort of the strategic moment now that speaks to just the issue of poverty and fatherless homes?
Well, first of all, I think we got to deracialize race. Race is killing this society. If white people were to go to Europe tomorrow and Canada, and they were gone, it would not stop the black-on-black murder. It would not improve one thing in the black community that needs to be improved. And so, so we've got to look at what is the strategic things that we need to do right now. And that is, we believe that we must stop looking, that the big crisis in America is the death of our children. The leading cause of death of black children is homicide. Appalachian white children is prescription drugs. In upper income white kids in Silicon Valley, the suicide rate among teenagers is 6 times the national average. Parents are wearing yellow vests standing at railroad crossings to prevent teenagers from jumping in front of freight trains.
Wow.
And they have 2-parent households, $190,000 incomes. So the big crisis that, according to the Harvard study, is the death of our children. But if we have to look at each other through the lens of race and sexual orientation and all these other things that divide us and makes us tribal enemies, we're not going to come together to figure out how to change it. That's why if I found Terrence Staley's here, head of the Alliance of Concerned Men, one of the most effective grassroots organizations in the country and in this city. And that's because they build on the strengths of their relationship. What these kids need to change is a witness, not an advocate. They need someone to lead them and believe that they can change.
What you've said many times is that values have to be embodied in the life of a person. And at YLF, we couldn't agree with you more. Who were the people in your life that embodied those values?
Well, like I said, when my dad died when I was 9 and I had my buddies, when you grow up in a situation like that, you got to learn to take enough from those who love you to deal with those who don't love you. You know, you take a piece of my buddy's father was kind of my dad, Pop Henry, was a surrogate big brother. He talked to me. Some people don't realize that people don't talk to kids. We don't sit them down and let them say what's on their minds. There are always people giving them directions. And so what we need to do is we need to find leaders who love these children. Yeah, but again, loving with discipline. So we're never going to replace the fathers, nor most kids are not going to be raised in two-parent homes. But we can offer, you know, assistance to them until they get through that period, till they get old enough to think and act on their own. That's the challenge. How do we provide surrogates, relationships? The young men that we work with in the community that are surrogate, who are mentors, they are father figures. And our guys at Benning Terrace, when we went out there, the Alliance went out there, 53 murders in the 5 square block area in 2 years. And the Alliance, we worked with them. And it was a 12-year-old boy, Darrell Hall, was killed. And I said to the Alliance, God has chosen that neighborhood, go in there and bring them up to my office. And 16 of them came. And they came in separate vans, and they had bulletproof vests on. We searched them. It's fine to be spirit-filled, but not crazy. But we knew also the kids will fight when they're drinking together, but not when they're eating. So we had a meal for them. But the Alliance had social trust and moral authority. That's why the kids got in the van. But they also knew that some of the Alliance were ex-offenders themselves, that they were witnessing to the kids that just because your life started that way, that as a predator, that you can be an ambassador of peace. So it's a combination of witnessing to them, but also reaching out to them, reaching beyond the fear and loving them. Yeah. But also it's not enough to tell kids what not to do, you got to give them. So they were transformed to gang leaders or crew leaders to foremen, and they were hired by the housing authority and the maintenance department, and the leader of the avenue was a foreman, and the leader of the circle was a foreman, and they switched them up. But we also provided support for them. We gave them trips out of town. We just celebrated their peaceful, and they began to really become coaches to the kids. So now they're still volunteering as coaches. Yeah. So they are again moral mentors. It's just wonderful. Terrence is the second generation leaders of the Alliance of Concerned Men. Tyrone Parker has retired.
I love that virtuous circle that you start to see. You know, we've been 25 years in the making at YLF, and now we're starting to see some of the young people who were mentees are now mentors, and that's just so gratifying. I wanted to ask,
love is regenerative.
It is.
If you plant that seed, it will regenerate and reproduce itself. And that's what these young men do. They're reproducing themselves and other people.
So, you know, I wanted to ask, you know, you said what is needed just for these kinds of change to happen is social trust and moral authority. And what I find is that the moral authority is usually sort of these narratives that don't espouse any kind of personal responsibility. It sort of points to exterior, roadblocks as the cause of personal problems. Why do you think that's so appealing? Because what I see is that there's broad sort of adherence to some of these thoughts. What is the appeal of that kind of perspective? Why does that take the moral authority of so many?
Well, I think that, I know with the Bending fellas, again, we love with discipline. I say to them, because when they stop this predatory life, they end up doing stupid stuff. But it's nonviolent stupid stuff. It's selling some dope or going back to some place they're hanging out when they shouldn't. And so I say to them, and Curtis and all of us who were mentoring them, we're saying, when they get locked up, and invariably a lot of them do, but we appear in court at sentencing to say to the judge, give them to us, don't send them to prison. Even though the prison system says, the probation department, pre-sentencing says, no, lock them up. We said, no, judge, this is who we are. Make sure we have our suits on. We give them a folder, tell the judge will know who we are, and we say, give them to us. In every case, these judges have given those kids to us. But I've also said to them, I'm going to do this one time. The next time you mess up, I'm going to be in court, but I'm going to watch you sentenced. Because obviously you want to go to jail if you're given this thing. And some of them, I did that. And when they went to jail, I would not take their calls for 2 months. Because I'm angry. I'm outraged. And they knew that. And then when we picked it up, but I'm still with him. But it's important, I think, not to pity people. The worst thing you can do is pity somebody. Because you gotta love to me is respect. And the kids will know when they're being respected. Mm-hmm. And that's what I advise people, that's what entices kids. You have to mimic to them what they are supposed to do. I say to them when we first connected, I said, I don't smoke, drink, or swear around you. Don't you do that around me. That's just the rules. And I know you do all three of them. But that's just the rules with us. And I went to speak at a church in Baltimore, and they were at the hotel, Wayne and all of them. I had about 7 of them. And they were sitting in the bar drinking Coke, because my wife and I were there. And I knew they normally would not be sitting there drinking soda, But out of respect. So I knew that we were reaching them. But you got to believe that people have the capacity to respond. And that is something you can't lip sing. And what these kids need is to be loved out of their misbehavior.
So right after you worked at a couple of different organizations that were sort of like grassroots organizations, you moved in a fellowship with the American Enterprise Institute, and you met folks like Peter Berger. Tell me a little bit about your time there, what you learned.
My political journey, first of all, again, what I witnessed about the bait and switch game, about the poverty programs, I realized that poor blacks and poor people, period, are being hustled. That the civil rights leaders became political figures. They got involved in handing out all this money coming from the poverty programs, and I knew they weren't serious when 70% of all the money goes to professionals, and they have conferences to talk about the problem, where they hire their friends as consultants. And I saw this, and I objected to it. And so I went to work for the Unitarian Service Committee, a white, liberal, ultra-liberal organization in Boston. And they were spending, again, 70% of every dollar on administration. So I said, well, the problem's with white liberals, so I'm going to go to a black liberal organization, the Urban League. It was worse there. And I realized it had nothing to do with race. It had everything to do with the exploitation of poor people. Again, there was a structural problem. So I was there for 5 years, and President Nixon gave the Urban League $93 million to serve poverty. That's a $500 million in today's dollars. You don't want to know what happened to that money. But again, it didn't create any kind of outcry. Then I realized that most people working, we had to conspire to excellence. You had to sneak around to help poor people. And so I realized that it was my problem, not their problem. I was in an environment where people were using these funds to promote their friends and relatives, and I was there to serve. And so I left and went to the American Enterprise Institute. And they said, oh, you're going to this conservative institute. And I was able to get more done there because, again, conservatives had strategic interests that was compatible with mine. If you own a business and you need 100 employees to come to work on time and capable of being retrained every 7 years, and I've got 100 people who need jobs, I don't care what your racial attitude is. I don't care what you think about me or anything. You have strategic interest that is compatible with my strategic interest, and therefore we have the foundation of a relationship.
Absolutely.
You see, so I went to the American Enterprise Institute, and when I was there, I was able to write books to bring Kimmy Gray and grassroots leaders into the think tank and write books about how they were able to achieve the change that they did. I wrote 3 books when I was there that I didn't get a chance to write with the Urban League. And so my politics, I'm a cardiac Christian, and my politics is radical pragmatism. I just want to know what works for the least of these.
Absolutely.
And it's not, I can't look at life through a lens of a conservatives or a liberal.
Yes. So, one of the things, or, just, I did a little research on you, and I know that you were influenced by Peter Berger's writing about how to best empower people.
Right.
And using these, what he called
mediating structures. Yeah.
Structures.
All that really means is that, again, going back in the writings, it's important to understand that people keep saying that the problem with poor blacks today is slavery and Jim Crow. That is not true. So what we did was we went back into history to look at what happened after slavery. One of our scholars looked at the records of 6 plantations to see what was the state of marriage. 75% of slave households had a man and a woman raising children. The nuclear family continued for 100 years from slavery up until 65. And because Julius Rosenwald, the Jewish CEO of Sears, partnered with Booker T. Washington, he put up $4 million. The black community raised $4.8 million, and they built 5,000 schools to teach blacks to read. And as a result of that, between 1920 and 1940, the education gaps between blacks and whites in the South was 8th grade for whites, 5th grade for blacks. In less than 20 years, that gap closed within 6 months because of these Rosenwald schools. Question: if the education gap could be closed during segregation, when the schools had half the budgets of white schools, it had used textbooks, tell me why we cannot close the gap today. How 13 public schools in Baltimore, Maryland today cannot produce one child that can read at grade level. When at the turn of the century, we had 5 high schools. Dunbar, during the turn of the century in Baltimore, used textbooks, crumbling buildings, whatnot. They out-tested every white high school in the city of Baltimore. Our young people need to know what we did under difficult circumstances. And so the question is, if we were able to achieve building a railroad, we had our own railroad in Baltimore. How many of you knew we had our own railroad? In 1868,
I have to confess I didn't.
when 1,000 blacks were fired from the docks of Baltimore, we started our own railroad and successfully ran it from Maine to Baltimore and hired back the 1,000 people, including whites. Our young people need to know how we achieved what we did when we did it. Because if we did it then, we can do it again.
I think this is the perfect point to ask you a little bit about 1776 Unites and just the power of sort of combating a narrative of can't do with one of how we did.
Again, 1619 with Hannah Nicole Jones and all these middle-class blacks who are victim-oriented, who are hustling people. Black Lives Matter raised $100 million. Abraham Kendi got $48 million at the Boston Research Institute to do research on racism. Hannah Nicole Jones got $25 million at Howard to do something, God knows what. How much good could that money have done if it were invested in our communities, like with the Alliance of Concerned Men, or with the Pineywood Day School in Jackson, Mississippi, or the Frederick Douglass School in Chester, Pennsylvania, we're trying to stop them from having to close their doors. And so we have distorted, and that's why I'm really bitter about how people are using race to deflect attention away from the real solutions, and the real solutions are where the problems are.
Can you tell me a little bit about just the method that the approach that folks that are in the community, Community Alliance?
First of all, you can learn nothing from studying failure except how to create it. And so if you say that 70% of families in these communities are raising children that are dropping out of school or in jail and drug, it means 30% are not. No one ever goes into the homes of the 30% to find out why are people able to achieve in those circumstances. How could a young man who was involved in predatory life through God's grace have been transformed and redeemed, like Terrence here and others, how they then are still living in the same zip code, and they are able to attract and change and redeem other young people. They are what we call community antibodies. You know how God has oriented the human body towards health. The moment there's a cut, antibodies are drawn to this point of injury, right? These young people are antibodies, and collectively they are holding an immune system. That's why last summer, Terrence and the Alliance of Concerned Men in the Greenway neighborhood, in the Greenway neighborhood was able to produce peace, not a single incident for 100 days. It was news for one day. If a white cop had shot someone out there, it would have been news all week. And so we're trying to change the narrative. So 1776 is trying to change the narrative to say, if we were able to achieve great things under segregation, building our own railroads, we built 100 hotels, the Wallahaji in Atlanta, the Carver and Calvert hotels in Overtown in Miami, the St. Teresa in New York, the St. Charles in Chicago. If we built all of these things, One story I like to tell from our essays is Elijah McCoy.
Yeah.
Elijah was born of fugitive slave parents and is educated in Canada, became an engineer, came back to Chicago because he's black. The railroad put him down the most dangerous job, oiling the wheels. So he invented a mechanism to the wheels could be automatically oiled, and he became a millionaire. And when the owners of the people were building knockoff, for example, and the owners of the railroad, no, we want the real McCoy.
Right, that's where that comes from.
So that's where that comes from.
Yeah.
The real McCoy means it's excellence, but this man was in the Inventors Hall of Fame. And so our young people need to hear these stories. Mm-hmm. They need to be inspired by victories that are possible and not injuries to be avoided. I mean, you're a coach and you tell your team, they're bigger than we are, they beat us before, they got better uniforms. You know, go out there and try not to get killed.
Yeah.
What coach would last? But that's what we're telling our kids. Oh, it's racism, it's this. Just because you're from an abused household and because no. Life might have knocked you down. The victimizer might have knocked you, but the victim has to get up. And so what Terrence and other people teach our kids is a strategy of getting up.
Yeah, yeah.
Saying to them, never lose hope. Mm-hmm. Never do. But everybody else pimps their problem. But they got racism to insulate you so you won't raise the question. It's like a spear and a shield. A shield from anybody asking the questions. You know, how could a superintendent in Baltimore make all the money she's making when not a single child can read graduating from the school? How do you explain that? Mm-hmm. How do you explain the fact that when at the turn of the century in that same school, they outscored the white school? Why don't we have a discussion of that? Why isn't that debated among black scholars? But you won't get any discussion of that.
I love what you said about just radical pragmatism. You know, I think that's sort of what I espouse too. And from it comes such good ideas. You know, just this strategy, you know, to be able to solve the problems in a practical way that works. And one of the things that has come out of the Woodson Center is something that seems similar to what we do at YLF. It's called violence-free zones. Can you share with just our listeners and just the folks
the violence-free zone was really created with the Alliance of Concerned Men. They demonstrated that these 6 men could go into a war-torn area where the police were afraid to go in and identify just 16 young men. We brought them to our office and we negotiated a truce. But the Alliance then became surrogate fathers to those young people. And they started working for the Housing Authority. Some of them started their own business. They just did a variety of things. But the principle that we went from 53 murders down to 0 for 12 years. And so it made headlines all over the country. PBS did a special on it. So, but everybody wanted to take credit for it. So we said, well, why don't we take the principles that we learned from the Alliance. We took it to Milwaukee and we took it to Atlanta, we took it to Dallas. And what we did was we concentrated in public schools so we could easily measure the impact. So what we end up doing is taking people like the Alliance that fit their profile, call them youth advisors. We would partner with a not-for-profit in the city like the Running Rebels in Milwaukee, and they would hire 6 young adults, and they would be working full-time in the school as moral mentors and character coaches. They weren't security, but and so as a result, they would circulate among the kids. If you have a school of 1,000 kids, they're controlled by 10%. And that 10%, 10%. So if you can get the chief shot callers, and then you can flip them, they become agents of change. In other words, what a lot of these tough young people who are predators are looking for is a respectful way to be peaceful. If I'm listening to Edward Harris, you know Dink, and Terrence and Rico and all them, if they say it's cool to be peaceful, then I can be peaceful. And so it's once a person's character changes, their characteristic has an advantage. That's an important principle. Once your character changes, your characteristic has an advantage. If you were a predator and you become an ambassador of peace, you got moral authority because you've been there. Mm-hmm. So you're able to witness, and a witness is more powerful than an advocate.
Absolutely, and I think that's the perfect moment to call on one of our witnesses. I'm going to bring up here Alex Price, character director at our summer programs and a mentor during the regular school year, to take my place and ask you a few questions just on behalf of our mentor community.
Sure.
Come on up, Alex.
And I'm going to have my colleague Terrence say something before we end too. I want to share him with you.
Awesome. Good evening, and it's definitely been a pleasure being here and just hearing you share of your life experience. One question that comes to mind, just in the vein of mentorship and moral authority, like you were saying, in the very beginning, you shared that your mother taught you values that helped you to choose your friends. I'm definitely under the impression that environment, especially friendship, shapes a lot of a person's behavior. And so what were some of those values that your mom instilled into you that helped you make those decisions?
Well, first of all, she said to me, when other women are going to the bar, I'm coming home to you every night. We never heard of leftovers because whatever we ate, we had to buy it, and it was consumed that night. So she always, at the end of the street, had bags in her arms. And we ran up and met her. So she stayed with us and demonstrated by her love and the time that she put in with us what we should be doing. We saw how she conducted herself with her friends. We went to church. And so those are the kind of how we never heard her. She was angry at me. She also had a mark around her neck when she carried a strap. But no, she gave us discipline.
Yes, sir. Another question that I have, you talked also about your military experience, and I wonder how would you say that impacted your philosophy of self-empowerment?
Well, when you get on an airplane and you go 1,000 miles away, you don't know anybody, and you got to make friends right away. A lot of my experience on the street of Philly enabled me to reach out. Usually guys from the same city, big cities all hang together. But you know how to accept discipline. I thought I was pretty tough, particularly if, and so I had a big drill sergeant who was white, 6'3" from Texas. And so I thought I could do something there. And so he just said, well, look, I can forget these here stripes. You and I can go down there in the ravine. I said, no. My instincts kicked in. And so I learned to subordinate my little ego that I thought I had. So I learned right away that I could not beat that man. So good sense prevailed. Just little lessons like that, and also just a give and take. I mean, I'm around people suddenly with Southern accents, one guy with a German accent, one guy from from Oklahoma, mountain man, and just to be around the various ethnic groups and whatnot. And so it opened up my life. When you grow up in a small black neighborhood when people didn't have cars, so you didn't travel very far.
Yeah.
And so your life is defined by just your environment. And so suddenly you get on an airplane and you go up and you see, and Philly has narrow streets and no trees down South Philadelphia.
Mm.
And then suddenly you go out and you see big highways. It's a cultural shock
Yeah.
to somebody, you know.
Yeah. I definitely remember, even just in my own community, bringing a young man. He was about 12 years old. We were headed downtown DC for a church service, and he was so amazed just at the lights and the buildings, just in awe. And I was in awe of the fact that he had never seen it all before. I thought it was regular, you know. But in that vein, you know, just speaking about how environment shapes and impacts, could you share the story that you were touching on earlier with the young men who got to travel to Ghana and Egypt?
Yeah, we support a group similar in Harlem that caters to kids whose parents are in prison. It's a mentorship program. And just recently, they took a group to Ghana. They take them to Egypt and different places. This one young woman did it out of her own pocket.
Wow.
And then the Woodson Center came along and funded her. Now she's able to take 60.
Wow.
But she took the kids to Ghana, and they were playing basketball against the kids in Ghana, but they noticed that the Ghanaian kids had holes in their sneaks. So all of our kids took off their sneaks and gave it to the Ghanaian kids. And so there's a picture of them taking their sneaks and giving it to them. And for the rest of the trip, they walked around with flip-flops on and sweat socks.
Hmm.
And they did it, and they didn't realize, I was moved to tears in watching the video, but they didn't think anything of it. I said, what's everybody all emotional about?
Yeah.
And I just saw that they were communicating some very important values. And so when they got back, we had a big ceremony where a couple stores gave them each 2 pairs of good sneaks. But the girls then saw what the fellows are doing, and they gave them all their clothes.
Mm.
So we don't think of the importance of kids in those environments being able to give something to someone else.
Yeah.
We always think that to help people like that, you have to give them things rather than put them in a situation where they're giving to others. And that's what distinguishes an empowerment approach, is that a person should not have to surrender their dignity as a result of getting help from you.
Hmm.
That's why it's important. Brother Carl Hodrick, Terrence, you'll know, I asked him once, Carl was, we call him the mayor of the ghetto in Hartford, because everybody, gang member in the city knows Brother Carl. They got a statue almost of him. And I asked Carl years ago, I said, Carl, I hear a lot about what you do for the kids, man, but what do they do for you? And he said, well, Bob, you know, some years ago, my brother was beaten by these guys. And I went to see him in the hospital. And Steve Holton, who had just gotten out of the head of the the gang members. And Steve was 16 at the time when seeing his brother was paralyzed from the neck down. And his brother said, Brother Carl, this is who did it, because I know you're going to get him. And so Carl was enraged, and he was going to go home and get his gun, until Steve said to him, Brother Carl, if what you've been teaching me don't mean nothing, I'll go with you. But if what you teach me means anything, you'll call the police. So you tell me which way you want to roll. Carl said it stopped him on his tracks and saved his life. That's the kind of profound impact these kids can have on you.
Yeah. Wow.
You know, that just blew my mind but these stories, I've been knowing Carl for years, so you never heard that, but it shows you what impact they can have on you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that's, first of all, it's an incredible story. And it's definitely a testament to kind of like what Janaea was saying earlier, the virtuous cycle, or like what you were saying about how the seed of love, is planted and it multiplies, and kind of like rejuvenates and restores, even those who are committed to doing this work. So I think that that's an awesome testament, an awesome witness, to that. I believe I just have maybe one or two more questions. I don't want to take up too much time. I wanted to ask, what was your biggest takeaway from kind of the change that happened in your perspective when it comes to your civil rights work?
I guess I'm still disappointed that the civil rights has become a race grievance industry, and that the people are still exploiting the whole race issue to the benefit of themselves and not the people that they serve. I'm still disappointed at that, and still trying to challenge it, trying to direct funding away from this hustle so that it gets invested where it's needed. And so that's my biggest frustration right now, is trying to, because I see, just one other point too about the importance of using money to take kids out of their environment. A lot of our Benny guys had not been to the Potomac River. When I brought them at my house in Silver Spring, they had never been out there before. And then we took them some of them to Houston. We took some of them whitewater rafting in Alaska, and we took 4 of them to Russia.
Wow.
And I was asked to speak. Curtis went with me, and Edward Harris. They were going to pay me an honorarium to come and speak in Russia, and I said, instead of an honorarium, why don't you give me 4 tickets?
Wow.
So I took Omar and Anton Lucky in Dallas. It took me 2 months to negotiate with the parole board to get him released to go.
Wow.
I had to call a friend who was on the parole board because his parole officer wasn't going to let him go. So she walked in. She said, "I don't know who he knows, but you got somebody with some juice." Because I told him, no, you weren't going, and then within 24 hours, word came down from the parole board that you were on your way to Russia. And he got her a gift when he was over there. Shows you an act of grace. But again, when I took them over there, they were speaking through an interpreter, Sasha, and they met 4 young Russians who carried with them all week. And the first night at dinner, man, their exchange was so intense that they didn't even stop to eat.
Wow.
That even Russia, with these values and these principles and these virtues that we're talking about, transcend race, they transcend cultures. So.
Yeah, I'll say just as my last question, I think it's a perfect segue, what you just said about how the values are transcendent. One of the points that I kind of took away from a bit of your earlier statements was that the idea of like intersectionality can really dehumanize people. When you were speaking about how one of our major problems here in the country as a whole is the death of our young people. It affects every demographic, and you listed the different methods, but the problem is still the same, the death. And so with that, I would ask, what would you offer? What would be your statement to someone who's kind of drank that proverbial Kool-Aid of believing that, because I identify as this, and the other, that, I'm limited to whatever the people above me tell me I'm limited to? What would you say to them?
Well, what I say to all the people who are exploiting the only black American wore the crown of thorns of slavery and Jim Crow. Gays didn't, women didn't, Nobody else wore the crown of thorns, and therefore they have no right to appropriate that suffering. And to say, well, because I'm gay, you know, I know what it's like, no, to be enslaved. No, you don't. And so that's one response. One response to it is, but again, it's important to be around people who inspire you, and you're inspiring by examples. And the other thing that I tell people who come up with all these exotic propositions and whatnot, the bottom line is, tell me how what you propose, what impact does it have on improving the lives of the least of these? You can talk all of the smack you want, but the bottom line is, tell me how that. Right now, we have a group called Voices of Black Mothers United. Mm. These are the mothers of women, mothers who lost children to homicide. We have about 2,000. We just ended a retreat where 19 of the leaders went to Costa Rica for 3 days for a retreat, so they can bond and repair. What they did last year, we're going to repeat this year. They got together with a group of mothers, white mothers who lost their children to suicide, and people from Appalachia who lost their children to prescription drugs. Yeah. It's called the Mothers Consortium. And for 3 days they came together, and there was just a bond. And that's what we've got to do. But in order to bring together people so that we can deal with this moral and spiritual free fall that our children are in. It's a moral and spiritual problem we have. It is not a social, it's not a race problem. But we're not going to be able to get to it as long as we've got to look at each other through the prism of race. And we've got to stop letting people hustle the issue. People are making a lot of money on television keeping us together. You can't build anything by tearing it apart. Yeah. You know? And so, again, you need to have a standard against which anybody who offers an argument or... When I listened to him, I was on there with Hawk Newman from Black Lives Matter. And my rejoinder to him every time was, tell me how what you propose is going to add value to the life of somebody in these communities. Yeah. Tell me how it contributes to their flourishing. And that's the standard against which you ought to make everybody conform to that. Tell me, when you leave here, tell me how that's going to improve the life of the people that I love and I care for. If I could, I want my brother, if he would, to come and just share. Come here, man. If he can.
Thank you. And deeply humbled to be next to Brother Bob, and I remember the last time I actually spoke in front to Bob, and I mentioned what he's done for the Greenway community and for the district. There has been an uptake in violence, and Brother Clay, who's the president of ACM as well, can speak to this. And we've all felt the uptake in violence post-COVID and mid-COVID. And so Greenway was host to the district's last mass shooting that occurred. And it was right in front of our office. 23 people were shot, a law enforcement officer was shot, Christopher Brown lost his life, and it was, I think they said it was over 230 rounds that were sprayed in one direction, or many directions. And when we think about mass shootings, it's usually someone coming out to a location and then exiting. This mass shooting took place street to street, block to block. So this was Greenway internal. So this was different. And Brother Bob like an angel in the sky, and the Woodson Center came, and we had requested resources for Ward 7 to provide services there where our office is, right? And never received those resources. And I can't even tell you what occurred to where the Woodson Center fell out the sky and knew that we needed resources and provided us resources to be able to mitigate the conflict in Greenway. And so when you're dealing with internal conflict, there needs to be a transformation of the culture of violence and the culture of that specific community. And so our first session, we have a conflict, and I won't hold you long. We have a conflict resolution manual that's copywritten in partnership with the American University's Department of International Conflict Resolution and Peace. And those same crew members that Brother Bob transformed were the same ones that went up to American University to conduct the study. And so the manual was produced, which is our diamond, and it's conflict resolution, which is culturally specific for those that are involved in conflict with others and themselves. First session, we had resources to have 20 people there. And we ended up having 40. And so these were all individuals, ski mask on, mid-COVID, and they were all at odds with each other. And so when I walked in there, one of the youngins, Mr. Terrence, they know me from being a credible messenger, and actually, before I became the ED, right? And he said, he lifted up his shirt. He had 15 staples from his gut to his groin. And he showed it to me. He said, Mr. Terrence, I promise I'll never miss a session. I was like, don't worry about it. Go in there, eat some pizza, and right? This is a safe space for you. So, okay, all right, okay, I'll walk up in there. So he went up in there, and so he sat down. When he went in there, we made him feel comfortable, and we had everybody take off their masks. Now, we took our mask. We all took a risk, right? Mid-COVID, there's roughly 45 people in there, and we said, let's take off our masks so we can see each other. First time they had seen each other in who knows how long. When the mass shooting happened, everybody had masks on. Nobody knew who shot at each other, but it was internal. One person had shot in the air, and after that one shot, the guns were pointed at each other. Brothers, sisters, cousins. And so he stood up and he said, hey, I got shot, right? Showed the staples, and he said, you know what, but I'm here with y'all getting conflict resolution. Another youngin jumped up, hey, I got shot too. Yes, just yesterday. Who's to say they didn't shoot each other? And so what really sunk in with me is that instead of retaliating outside the community, they were inside the office getting conflict resolution. And that's because of the resources that the Woodson Center dropped from the sky, right, for us to be able to do the work that we're currently doing right now. And with the Violence-Free Zone, the OG initiative that we made in consolidation with the Woodson Center, there was no way we would have been able to develop this. We had 100 days of no shooting. We were so peaceful in Greenway, we were able to get speed bumps in Greenway. We were tracking packages taken off the front porch, right? So you're going from the most violent location in the District of Columbia because of a mass shooting to tracking packages taken off the front porch. And that's the power of transformation. That's the power of relationships in these communities. And that's the replication of models that were established so long ago. Fast forward to right now. We were able to receive DOJ funds to continue the OG initiative. Only reason why we were able to do that is because he gave us the whole year to be able to create a model that's replicable for the rest of the nation. Mm-hmm. And so, Brother Bob, honest and truly, when it comes to this work, this man has set a precedent and has set generations forward, and I'm honestly grateful, sir.
That's you, man. All right. Any questions anybody has?
And so with that, I just want to thank those who've attended our live stream. Thank you so much, Mr. Woodson, for your time, and for all those that shared about how we can become agents of our own uplift, in the words of Mr. Woodson. Thank you so much for joining us, and with that, we'll end our live stream broadcast to just open up questions to the audience and some general conversation with the folks who are with us this evening. Thank you again.
Thank you. So.